Before we get started, I want to issue a content warning for the following subjects. In this episode, we will be discussing instances of abuse in various forms, mutilation, people hunting, torture, murder, suicide, and witchcraft. Today's episode is not for the faint of heart, and we will be diving into some very deep and disturbing subject matter. I do mean for this episode to be educational, and I want you to learn from it, but if you don't feel comfortable listening, feel free to skip this one. I completely understand. I will also be including the real names of the people mentioned in this episode. I hope this isn't seen as disrespectful. I am only including them to make sure that you have the opportunity to research their stories further. But that being said, there are several foreign words and names that are going to be mentioned over the course of this episode that I might have some trouble pronouncing. So if I mispronounce anything, I am sorry. I am trying my best. And finally, stay tuned until the very end of the episode for updates on the Legend Has It podcast and a message for some of our listeners. And with that out of the way, let's get started. If you walk down Liberty Street in Salem, Massachusetts, you will find a memorial. You can't miss it. It's a 4-foot-tall stone structure, and protruding from it, there are 20 granite benches. Each one is inscribed with a name and a date. Bridget Bishop, June 10th. Sarah Good, July 19th. John Proctor, August 19th. History remembers these people and others in their village as victims, killed in cold blood and accused of a crime they didn't commit, practicing witchcraft. Odds are you've heard of the witch trials that took place in Salem in 1692. They've been discussed and examined countless times in history books, essays, lectures, poems, novels, TV shows, movies, cartoons, and even a show on Broadway. We know the story of how a group of young girls caused a riot in their small New England village, and ultimately 25 people lost their lives. It's a tragic story. It's a stain on the history books that shows just how fearful and superstitious people have the ability to be. Luckily, the world has done a lot of growing in the past 300 years. Science and logic have progressed by leaps and bounds, and we're no longer victimized by a fear of the supernatural. Witches are just a thing of the past. Or at least, that's how it appears on the surface. But if you dig a little deeper under that shiny veneer of what we like to call progress, you'll find that all across the world, people are still ruled by fear. And worse still, the legend of the witch is as strong as it's ever been. This is Legend Has It. I'm your host, Michael Walker. They're known as the Dion, or the Dane, or sometimes the Toni, but they all mean the same thing: witch. The further you travel into the thick rainforests of India, far away from the densely populated cities of Mumbai and Delhi, you are likely to find small farming villages. Many of the people in these villages suffer from severe poverty and have no access to education, and many are discriminated against based on their caste and their gender. These factors all mixed together create the perfect, crucible for starting witch hunts, and the numbers prove it. Hundreds of people are assaulted and even murdered on accusations of practicing witchcraft in India every single year. According to India's National Crime Records Bureau, over 2,500 supposed witches were murdered between 2000 and 2016. However, these statistics may be even higher than that. Oftentimes, these witch hunts are not reported to the police. And even if they are, the police do not recognize witch hunts as a legitimate crime, and thus do not include the word Dion in their reports. So, why do these attacks happen? Well, one contributing factor is that the people living in these smaller, secluded villages have a very limited understanding of how diseases work, and instead fall back on their understanding of folklore. If someone falls ill and dies as a result of their illness, they didn't contract a virus. No, they had a curse put on them. Oftentimes, their families will accuse other people, either people who had public disagreements with the deceased, or were the last person to see them alive, of being a Dion. In the summer of 2020, a string of deaths that happened over the course of 2 weeks ended in a witch hunt in the village of Nettimato. An elderly couple, Shaila and Basanti Balamak, were accused of making half a dozen people gravely sick with the use of black magic. So while they were sleeping, a mob barricaded them in their house and set it on fire. Shaila and Basanti both died in the blaze. On the exact same day that Shaila and Basanti were murdered, a young woman, Lapika Oro, was admitted to a hospital in Malkangiri. She had been sick for a whole week. Her family had tried everything they could to help her, but nothing seemed to be working. It wasn't long before someone suggested that she might be possessed by an evil spirit, and so Lapika's family brought in a shaman to perform an exorcism. The man, according to reports, was actually related to Lapika. He beat her repeatedly, trying desperately to banish the demon that he believed was hiding inside of her, and when the beatings didn't work, the shaman took a hot iron and pressed it against her face. And when that failed to exorcise the demon, he held her down and force-fed her pig feces. Thankfully, Lapika was rescued from her abusers and brought to a hospital to be treated. As you might expect, women are more likely to find themselves being accused of practicing sorcery, especially if they are poor or part of a lower social class. You'll find that most of the societies that still perform witch hunts are patriarchal in nature, and the women who live there have very limited rights. If a woman in a community does something that goes against social norms or does something one of her neighbors doesn't like, all one would need to do is accuse her of being a witch. That way, she'll either be chastised by others in the community, or she may be killed by them. Sometimes, however, greed is the catalyst that fuels a witch hunt. In 2019, First Post, an Indian newspaper, published a story about 3 women who were accused of being Dions in the Kochbong village of Jharkhand. Their names were Savitri Munda, Nari Devi, and Beena Devi. The reasons for these allegations are simple. These women own land that other people want. Nora Devi, according to reports, owns several plots of land. Savitri and her husband own 13 acres, and Beena Devi is a widow, meaning she currently is the only one in control of whatever plot of land she may own. Their neighbors have started rumors about these women, saying that they practice dark arts in an attempt to drive them away from Kochbong so that they can claim their land. These women and their families have been harassed non-stop over the past several years and are the recipients of attacks and death threats whenever something unfortunate happens in their village. Nari Devi is the mother of 2 children, and they are taunted by the other kids at school, who yell at them and call them Dayan Kabaka, or children of the witch. Savitri claims that her very own family started the rumors against her, even going so far as to hire a mafia in the area to spread rumors of her being a Dion. I would like to take a bit more of an in-depth look into these witch mafias. illegal organizations that can be paid to start rumors of witches for some sort of gain. But to do that, we'll have to visit the Indonesian island of Java. Indonesia is no stranger to witch hunts. But in 2001, the Cianjur district was struck with an inordinate amount of witch hunt reports in a very short amount of time. 21 people were killed in these hunts, within just a few months and a very short distance from one another. And it was this localization of reports that made investigators suspicious. They believed that the witch hunts were actually carried out for, quote, revenge, rivalry, or extortion. Further investigations linked some of the murders, the victims of which were often businessmen, religious leaders, or political candidates, to mafia groups who could be paid to murder someone and stage it to look like a witch hunt instead of an assassination. They could also be paid to spread rumors around the village that the specified target was a witch, in the hopes that a mob would form to kill them themselves. A similar incident happened in Java 3 years earlier, in 1998. A group of traveling witch hunters dressed in all black, who the islanders called ninjas, traveled from village to village in search of witches. They were spurred by a list of over 330 supposed witches that was published by the Javanese government, in hopes that the public would take witch hunts into their own hands and deliver swift, vigilante justice. Before the group was disbanded, they had tortured and killed over 150 people across the island in just 2 months. And this is where the political intrigue comes in. See, a good number of the people on that list of supposed witches were leaders of the Islamic faith in Java, which has led some people to speculate that the list of witches might, possibly, have been part of an attack on the Islamic community by the Indonesian Communist Party. I don't want to dive too deeply into this, and as always, if that sounds like an interesting topic to you, I fully encourage you to follow up with your own research. But essentially, during the 1960s, there was a movement across Indonesia that ended in its own sort of semi-witch hunt. But instead of witches, Javanese Orthodox Muslims sought out communists. Communists and accused communists were massacred all across Indonesia in a bid to drive them out of the country. A few numbers have been tossed around, but anywhere from a couple 100,000 to 3 million people were killed in the slaughter. Finally, I want to talk about one more contributing factor to these witch hunts, possibly even the strongest contributor: religious fanaticism. If we hop from Indonesia all the way over to sub-Saharan Africa, we'll find countless Pentecostal churches. For those of you who aren't familiar, Pentecostals believe that the human body can be overtaken by the Holy Spirit, or an embodiment of God, in order to do miraculous things. In fact, their name comes from the word Pentecost, an event in the Bible when the Holy Spirit was said to have entered Jesus' apostles and allowed them to speak foreign languages they didn't know before, so that they could spread the word of God. These Pentecostal sermons are very high-spirited, with people dancing feverishly, singing loudly, slapping one another and stomping their feet, and sometimes falling to the floor in convulsions as the power of God surges through them. And it's here that you'll find instances of what people claim to be miracles: faith healing, laying on of hands, serpent handling, and, yes, speaking in tongues. Unfortunately, these Christian beliefs mix with old African folk beliefs that evil spirits are real and actively try to destroy people's lives. It certainly doesn't help that being a preacher in West Africa is one of the most prolific professions in the area. Many people try to start up their own churches, but they need a hook in order to keep people coming to see their sermons and paying their tithes. So many of these preachers hold sermons on protecting yourself from bad luck, demons, and witchcraft. The preachers at these churches claim to be able to tell if someone is a witch or very close to falling under the influence of the devil. They call them out in public in the middle of their sermons and plead with the people to give up their wicked ways. Some fall to their knees and beg for forgiveness, but oftentimes the witch will just stare back at them in confusion. They have no earthly idea what they've done to be labeled a monster. Their families can, of course, pay to have them exorcised, but these exorcisms can cost roughly $300, something not many of these people can afford. And even if they can, the exorcisms are brutal. The people will be beaten, often several times a day for many weeks, if not months, and forced to drink dangerous liquids filled with poisons in order to drive out the demons. If the families can't pay for the exorcism, the witches often run out of town, if they're not killed first, and they are never allowed to return. The grasslands of Nigeria are littered with small camps of accused witches who can never go home again. For this next segment, we're going to be staying here in Africa, just a little bit longer, so that we can take a tour of one of these witch camps. You see, there's a refuge towards the south of Nigeria that houses some of the most tragic cases of witch hunts you'll find on record. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to the witch children. As you drive up to a group of brick buildings in the Akwa Ibom state in Nigeria, you'll see small children appear from the trees, watching curiously as you drive by. As they get closer, you begin to notice the scars. Knife wounds everywhere. Some of them have gnarled skin on their arms, legs, and faces where they've been burned with fire or acid. One or two have scars on their body where nails were driven into them in order to extract a confession, and a few will stare back at you vacantly with solid white eyes that were blinded in a botched exorcism. There are a lucky few that don't show any visible scars, but have a distant look in their eyes that tells you they've seen far too much, especially for someone so young. These are the witch children of Nigeria. They've been taken in by the CRARN, or Child Rights and Rehabilitation Network, a non-profit organization that has rescued innumerable children who have been accused of being witches. In 2001, a mass witch hunt broke out in the Akwa Ibom state. Children in particular were accused of being witches and were tortured by the witch hunters in order to pull out confessions and find out who else might be a witch. This hunt went on for 3 straight months, and by the end of it, 800 men, women, and children had been murdered. While these witch hunts were still ongoing, a man named Sam Itauma came across kidnappers who were taking children from the market. Apparently the children were orphans and were begging for food, and a local grocer had spread a rumor that the children had put a curse on the market in order to ruin the businesses there. The kidnappers were taking the children to torture, maybe even kill them, but Sam managed to convince the kidnappers to give the children to him instead. He brought the children home and let them stay with him where it was safe, and more children came to join them there. And so the CRARN, or CRARN, was created, and to this day Sam Itauma and other volunteers fight tirelessly to protect children in the Akwa Ibom state from the bloodthirsty witch hunters. These children have been beaten and tortured and driven out of their villages by their pastors, neighbors, and their own families, people they should be able to trust. But why? Well, of course, there's a lot of nuance to it. Just like in any other situation, a child can be labeled a witch for any reason. They can be blamed for crops growing bad, or a heavy drought, someone's animals getting sick, or if someone in their village died unexpectedly. The child could also be blamed if one or both of their parents die unexpectedly. Orphans are often accused of being witches. There's also a strange belief amongst African churches that children in particular are susceptible to the devil's will, much like how early Puritans believed that women were weak and sinful in nature and more likely than their male counterparts to become witches. It's hard to say if this notion has always been a part of the folklore in Nigeria, but many people point to one woman in particular for popularizing the idea, and her name is Helen Ukpabio. Helen is an evangelical minister from Nigeria who, according to herself, is an expert on witchcraft. She leads sermons where she teaches her followers how they can protect themselves from black magic and how to tell if someone they know is a witch. She's written a couple of books, but arguably her most famous is Unveiling the Ministries of Witchcraft, which acts as a sort of witch hunting guide. It's based on a combination of African folklore, Christian belief, and Ukpabio's strange interpretations of both. Take, for example, a passage on how to tell if your infant child is an agent of the devil. Quote, "If a child under the age of 2 screams in the night, cries, and is always feverish with deteriorating health, he or she is a servant of Satan." Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds to me like Helen is describing a sick baby. Ukpabio's ministry organization, Liberty Foundation Gospel Ministries, has also produced several films to help spread awareness about the devil and his influence, such as one titled End of the Wicked, where children are seen astral projecting, eating human flesh, and indoctrinating other children into a cult where they worship the pale-skinned demon Beelzebub. Ukpabio clearly believes that age-old notion that children are easy prey for the devil, and, unfortunately, many of Ukpabio's followers are all too willing to believe her. According to a New York Times article from 2010 titled, "On a Visit to the U.S., a Nigerian Witch Hunter Explains Herself," Helen Ukpabio admits that she has had a rough history with the CRARN. She claims that they try to use her as a scapegoat and twist her words so that she looks like a hateful religious zealot, and that they are completely misinterpreting her message, even though she has on several occasions given sermons about how children can be possessed by demons and that those demons need to be cast out by any means necessary. Not only that, Sam Itauma claims she personally sent assassins after him in order to silence him and his organization. So, I'm not quite sure what there is to be confused about. She even has it in her head that some of the children at the CRARN actually are witches who are trying to turn the public against her, but there's no need to worry about that. Helen Ukpabio assures us that when the volunteers at the CRARN finally realize that they are dealing with the forces of evil, they can bring the witch children directly to her and her followers. In the words of Miss Ukpabio, they, quote, would deliver them. And if that doesn't sound like a threat, I don't know what does. But thankfully, the children have Sam and the other volunteers at the Children's Rehabilitation Center who work diligently to keep them all safe and sound. While we're here in Africa, I want to tell you about a man, a witch doctor, by the name of John Demo. John has a strange gift. He can apparently predict the future. He uses a form of divination where he tosses shells, bones, and sticks onto the ground, and he interprets the formation in which they all land in order to make predictions. According to the people in the village of Kogelo in Kenya, he is revered and respected as a witch doctor. I can't find much information on what the people in Kogelo seek his guidance for, but I do know that he's famous for his accurate predictions on something that happened on the opposite side of the world, the 2008 election of U.S. President Barack Obama. You see, some of the former president's relatives live in the village of Kogelo. It was his father's birthplace, and Barack Obama Sr. is also buried in a local cemetery. John Demo claims that while Barack Obama was visiting Cogello years ago when he was still a senator, Demo predicted that Obama was going to become the President of the United States of America, and in 2008, he was proven right. In all fairness, Demo's claims didn't surprise anyone in Cogello. They were all rooting for Obama to win the election. The people there have an almost religious reverence for Barack Obama. The myth surrounding the former president is so strong that some children in Cogello think that he is actually a king. After the 2008 election, tourists from the U.S. poured into Cogello, and the money that came from all that tourism bolstered the town in unimaginable ways. Where people used to live in very poor conditions, they now have access to electricity and clean water. Children there now attend an elementary and a high school, both of which are named after the former president, and visitors can have their pick of lavish hotels to stay in during their trip. John Demo, the local witch doctor, also accurately predicted the president's re-election in 2012, and in 2015 he predicted that the president would visit the village in secret while on a trip to Kenya. I don't know if Obama ever did have a secret rendezvous with his ancestral home, but I do know that he came back to visit the village 3 years later in 2018. The people of Cogello seem to believe strongly in Demo's predictions. When he predicted the president's arrival in 2015, a prediction that had no other precedent for it to be true, people began preparations. Committees came together to clean storefronts, sweep city streets, and perform maintenance on both a statue of Barack as well as his father's headstone. They fully believed his predictions would come true, that his magic had actually worked. And yet, as far as I've been able to find, Demo hasn't been the target of any witch hunts. He's able to perform his divinations openly and without consequences. I'm inclined to believe it's because he doesn't technically practice black magic, the distinction being that while white magic is often used to help people, black magic is used to harm or kill them. And if anything, Demo's predictions have been a source of great joy for the people of Cogello. But there are some self-proclaimed witch doctors who do practice black magic. That's not to say that they're actually casting magic spells because, well, of course they're not. They can't. But they think they can, and those thoughts can be very dangerous. An overwhelming number of people in Africa live in inhospitable conditions. They don't have access to clean water. Diseases like malaria, yellow fever, and Ebola run rampant, and 1/3 of the continent lives below the poverty line, which means they don't have food or basic medical care. It's a pretty dire situation, but some people believe they can overcome these things through human sacrifice. The people of Kiampisi and Uganda know this all too well. In recent years, there has been a surge in kidnappings, witch doctors taking people from their homes so they can harvest their body parts. They take their eyes, their noses, ears, blood, fingers, toes, and internal organs to use in fetishes or powders, which are thought to be able to cure diseases or bring people good luck. These are then sold to desperate people for large sums of money. Body parts that belong to an albino person are highly sought after, since it's believed that they have strong magic capabilities, and powders made from their body parts can sell for several $1,000s. Most of the people who are taken don't make it back alive, but some do, and that is when the Kiampisi Child Care Ministries steps in to help them. Children who have survived attacks from local witch doctors are brought to KCM, a Christian organization in Kiampisi. They are promptly given whatever medical care they need for their injuries. They are more than welcome to stay at the facilities, where they're provided with food, water, and clothes, and can attend a school run by the ministry. KCM also works with the Ugandan police force to track down and arrest these real witch doctors. As of the time I'm writing this script, their website boasts that they have prosecuted 83 witch doctors and saved the lives of 813 children. It was just a game. Halfway through the 80s, fear was sweeping the nation. Parents throughout the United States and Canada were taking books, pamphlets, dice, and mini figurines away from their children and throwing them in the garbage. They believed their children were playing a game that taught them real witchcraft, and that game was Dungeons and Dragons. If you've never played, Dungeons and Dragons, or D&D for short, is a tabletop role-playing game where a small group of players pretend to be a colorful assortment of fantasy creatures, like half-orcs, elves, and dwarves. They use sheets of paper to keep track of their equipment and health points, and they roll dice to see if they can hit their opponent with a great axe or a spell. And, yes, magic is a key part of the game. Wizards can learn how to cast spells through hours of study of the arcane arts. Druids draw their power from the forces of nature, and warlocks make pacts with eldritch beings in exchange for magic powers. There are roughly 5 official editions of Dungeons & Dragons, each with their own official handbooks and rules, and while those rulebooks can teach you how to play as a character that possesses magical powers, none of these books claim to teach players how to use real magic. So why did so many parents believe they did? Many people point to the story of James Dallas Egbert III. James was a prodigy and a college student who attended Michigan State University. One day, he was reported missing by his family. An investigator who was hired to find the 16-year-old heard rumors that James played a live-action equivalent of D&D in the steam tunnels underneath his school, so they continued the search there. James finally reappeared several weeks later. As it turns out, he had visited the steam tunnels, but not to play Dungeons and Dragons. No, James had gone to the tunnels to kill himself. But when his suicide attempt failed, he ran away, first hiding at a friend's house, then going to New Orleans, where he tried to kill himself again. Only he was unsuccessful. James and his connections to Dungeons and Dragons sparked a wildfire in the media. Books were written, both fiction and non-fiction, depicting the game as a recruitment tool for devil worshippers. A famous example of this would be Mazes and Monsters, a novel loosely based on the disappearance of James Egbert. And let's not forget about Dark Dungeons, a chick tract or a short gospel comic which was spread by evangelical Christians in order to demonize the role-playing game. In it, we are introduced to Marcy and Debbie, 2 young girls who like to play Dungeons and Dragons. It's revealed over time that the Dungeon Master, a character who leads the other players through the game's story, has been indoctrinating children into a satanic cult where she teaches them how to use spells from the game. Debbie goes on to become a full member of the cult and learns a spell that allows her to control the minds of others. She, of course, uses this power to force her dad to buy her Dungeons and Dragons game pieces. Marcy, whose character died early on in the comic, ends up taking her own life. And it's Marcy's suicide that makes Debbie reevaluate things, accept Jesus into her heart, and throw away her demonic game set. In 1982, Patricia Pulling tried to sue the principal of her son's school. Her son, Irving Lee Pulling, was depressed, so he took his own life. Irving was part of a Dungeons and Dragons group at his school that was led by his principal, and Patricia sincerely believed that a spell the principal had used in the game had actually been put on her son in real life. Needless to say, the suit was dropped. This fear that surrounded Dungeons and Dragons was part of an even larger moral panic at the time known as, well, the Satanic Panic. I would like to come back and address the Satanic Panic in a future episode, but for right now, for the purposes of this episode, all you need to know is that there was a wave of mass hysteria that swept North America between the 80s and 90s. Parents were worried that their children were victims of satanic ritual abuse and were being exposed to demonic forces through their TV shows, video games, and music. There were rumors of devil churches where respected citizens in various communities, like police officers and daycare workers, would go to abuse children and worship the devil. Neighbors turned on each other. Children were coerced into giving false testimonies, saying that their school teachers had abused them and kept kids in cages, and they accused their teachers of magical feats like flushing entire children down toilets and flying around their classrooms on broomsticks. And the adults were willing to believe all of it. Several people lost their jobs and were even sent to jail on charges of ritualistic abuse that never took place. I mentioned the Satanic Panic here in order to make a distinction. Even here, where I am in the United States of America, for all the resources and education we have at our disposal, this was still able to happen here. We Americans like to think of our country kind of like a beacon on a hill, a shining example of progress and enlightenment for the rest of the world to see. We look back on the witch trials of the past and laugh at how simple and superstitious people were 300 years ago. We mock how they blindly believed a group of young girls who told them they were being attacked by witches, and yet there are still people alive in the United States to this day who once believed you could summon the devil with a tabletop game. It seems as though these witch hunts can happen at any place, at any time, and anyone could end up believing in them. While I was writing the script for this episode, a friend of mine sent me a link to a Facebook live stream. On Sunday, August 30th, 2020, a televangelist named Jolynn Whitaker went live with a sermon on witchcraft. She accused Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrice Cullors, the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, of being actual witches. And she claimed that the people who have marched in protest for the Black Lives Matter movement have been possessed by demons. She even goes so far as to say that churches who support the BLM movement are in league with the devil. She shows her audience mugshots of protesters and tells them to look at their eyes. These people who have been marching all day, who have been met with resistance from police and counter-protesters and have been arrested and dragged into the police station, wear a tired, distant expression on their face, as if they're looking right past you. Any rational human being would understand that these people just look tired, but Jolynn says that exhausted look in their eyes is clearly a sign that they're possessed. And as she's explaining all of this, these crazy notions of witchcraft and demons and magic that I thought we'd all forgotten about centuries ago, imagine my shock when I looked down at the live comments on the video to see countless viewers in tandem typing out a resounding Amen. I'm well aware that this has been a difficult episode to get through. Over the course of this talk, we've taken a long, hard look at some of the cruelest actions human beings are capable of. I feel confident enough to admit that I actually hit some mental low points while reading the reports for this episode, but even though it's difficult to talk about, these witch hunts needed to be addressed. If more people know about them, if we bring them into the spotlight, maybe more things can be done to prevent them in the future. And, with that idea in mind, I hope we can end with a positive note. Laws have been and are being made to criminalize witch hunts in places where they are prominent, such as the Oliche Prevention of Witch Hunting Act. While these are a great step forward, these laws do have their shortcomings. They really only apply to the states where they are passed in, and sadly, not every state in Africa or India has passed such laws. Also, these practices are difficult to police, but there are also organizations who step in and try to destroy the problem on a personal level. I've already mentioned the CRARN and the Key-on-PC Child Ministries, who both do really incredible work, but there are others. Anandi is a feminist group that travels to secluded villages in India in an effort to counteract the spread of witch hunts. They teach the people there about how illnesses actually work, and they are strong advocates for women's rights. They also act as a response group for domestic abuse against women, especially those who have been accused of witchcraft. And they teach the women in these villages their rights, as well as how to file a police report against their abusers. When they do, they tell the women to make sure the word Dion is written in the report. Also, in the wake of the COVID-19 outbreak, a group called Jana Vignana Vedika has teamed up with police in India to teach people about diseases. The JVV also gives demonstrations and lectures about why science trumps superstition and why believing in magic is unreasonable. And I, personally, am a big fan of causes like this. I know that we like to talk about the paranormal exclusively on this show, but I personally believe that the paranormal should be approached through a critical, scientific lens. Yes, my job is to tell outrageous ghost stories, but I do so in hopes that it will inspire you, the listener, to look into these cases as well, hopefully with a critical mindset. And I'm sure that the JVV would agree with me when I say there is nothing scientific about magic. With that, I ask that you please consider donating to these organizations if you're able to. It doesn't have to be much, and every cent helps, and it could very well save someone's life. And maybe, just maybe, we can finally put the legend of the witch to rest. When the Salem Witch Trial Memorial was opened to the public in 1992, activist and writer Elie Wiesel was asked to give a speech. Mr. Wiesel wasn't just a famous writer, but also a Holocaust survivor. I don't know if he was aware of the actual witch hunts that were happening all across the globe. Instead, in his speech, he drew connections to the Moscow trials and to the Holocaust. But he says something interesting towards the end of his speech, and whether you're talking about political upheaval or genuine black magic, his words still ring true today. He says, "I believe fanaticism is therefore the worst evil that existed then, for it produced more evil. And fanaticism is the greatest evil that faces us today. For today, too, there are Salems." The Legend Has It podcast is researched, written, and produced by me, Michael Walker, with recording and editing assistance from Nick Kinney. All sound effects and music used in today's episode can be found in the episode description along with the sources cited. And as always, thank you to Nate Brislin of the Association for Cryptozoological Fieldwork and Analysis group on Facebook for giving us a place to share our episodes once they're uploaded. Now, I do have some notes here about the future of the Legend Has It podcast. We're going to go on a bit of a hiatus for a little bit. There's a lot going on in my life right now that researching and writing and recording and editing a monthly show is practically impossible at the moment. We're not going to go away. We're just going to take a few months to work on creating a backlog. I want to start doing 13 episode seasons with little breaks in between. So we're going to finish working out 7 more episodes to finish up this season. We're also going to be working on a Halloween episode. So I hope to have that polished up and ready to ship out on Halloween night. So keep your ears out for that. I'm also going to be moving soon. So once I get moved into my new place, we're going to start recording our YouTube exclusive web series, The Pseudoscience of, where we discuss the actual real-world science that can be used to prove or disprove claims of the paranormal. So I'm really excited to be working on that as well. And on top of that, I also want to set up our own website and spread our podcast to more broadcasting networks during this hiatus. So we've got a lot of big things that'll hopefully be coming out really soon. I don't really know when I'll see you all again. Hopefully it won't take all that long. I already have most of the scripts for the next 7 episodes worked out. They just need to be recorded. But until we hit the airwaves again, you can keep up with us on Instagram at Legend Has It Podcast and on Twitter at Legend Pod. And you can find our future episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, and soon many other podcast providers. So stay tuned and thanks for listening. I look forward to telling you more ghost stories really soon. I would like to end today's episode with an important message. 2, actually. One for you, the listener, and one for the volunteers and the children at the CRARN. For you listeners, I don't usually do things like this, but over the course of writing this episode, I felt a close connection to the Child's Rights and Rehabilitation Network, and I want to make sure I do my part to help them out as much as we possibly can. But I can't do that without you. I've personally spoken to Sam Itauma, and he said that one thing he would like to see done is to have businesses that benefit from being in the Akwa Ibom state, like Shell and Mobile, to help push for improvement in their local community, to help the locals who are in desperate need of change. And if any of you know how we can contact these businesses and try to get them on board with aiding the Akwa Ibom state, please share your thoughts with me. Comment below, shoot me some DMs on Instagram, tweet about it, send letters to the companies or even the CRARN. Let's do whatever we can to get the ball rolling. Their organization also needs donations. You can donate money to the CRARN through their website. I'll put a link to that in the episode description. But they also need supplies. Yes, they need clothes and they need food, but they also need ways to cook that food. So pots, pans, and other utensils are needed. But most importantly, they are in desperate need of fencing. Witch hunters are still an active threat, and they continuously try to attack and kidnap the children at the CRARN. And so they need high fencing in order to keep them out and keep the children safe. On top of that, they also have a Facebook page, which I will link to below. You can message them directly from there to find out what other supplies their organization will need. And if you aren't capable of making a large donation, it's okay. If you aren't capable of making any, that is okay. But if you're able to, it would mean so much to me and so much to the CRARN if you made a donation in any way. And it could help save the lives of countless children. And to Mr. Itauma and the volunteers at the Child's Rights and Rehabilitation Network, I know you're going to be listening to this. I would like to say thank you for everything that you do. I can't imagine how difficult it is to do what you all do, day in and day out, putting your lives on the line to protect your community, to protect the children. You are some of the bravest people I've ever heard of, and you have one of the toughest jobs on the whole planet. You are truly people of grit, of great strength and fortitude, and you have nothing but my highest respect. And to you, the children at the CRARN, I want you to listen closely. I want you to know that things are going to get better from here. I've heard it said that the Akwa Ibom state, where your organization is in, is also known as the land of promise. There is so much potential for your state, for your country, for it to improve and become a beacon on the hill for others around you. I know Sam and the other adults you know are working towards that bright future. I'm sorry this world has shown you such immense cruelty in your lifetime, punishing you for crimes you couldn't possibly have done. I pray that you are somewhere you feel safe. And I pray that you will always be safe. You are all so incredibly brave. You all have such strong spirits. And I want you to know that you are not forgotten, that you are loved. And one day, you will live in a better world. A world where people are no longer ruled by violence or superstition or fear. I promise.